于是错过国神，定是刘邦得了错的，故大事去也。大王，依故看来，今日是你我分的命，是人呀了。
Welcome everybody to another episode of Tom and Will Discuss. And for those that don't know, this is an in-depth discussion of movies, but in the first 10 minutes it'll be spoiler-free, where we'll talk about the film, a synopsis of it, and our general thoughts, and then we'll go into an in-depth discussion. So as I said, it'll be spoiler-free.
That sounds like a good plan, Thomas. I think we can start by exploring the actual DVD itself that we've picked up and we have watched actually last night. What we're going to do is just start by reading the synopsis on the back and to tell you a little bit about this BFI release. So, straight from the back cover, it's a film by Shane Cage, based on the best-selling novel by Lillian Lee. Farewell My Concubine is an epic exploration of art, friendship and betrayal. Set against a tumultuous backdrop of more than 50 years of Chinese history, the film charts a relationship between Shang, who's played by Leslie Cheung, and Yuan, who's played by Shang Fengyi, two stars in the Peking opera troupe, and the woman who comes between them. Shane Cage's sumptuous and moving epic holds an important place in the history of Chinese language cinema, recognised with more than 20 major awards, including a Golden Globe, a BAFTA, and so on. So it's won a lot of awards. It's quite a prestigious title now, isn't it?
Totally, it totally is, and when you watch it, you know, you can understand why it was so successful. To give a little bit of a background then about the filmmaker, it's directed by Shane Cage, and it stars the actors that he mentioned, and you know they all do a fantastic job, but more on that later. But this film is known because it's part of the 5th generation of great Chinese cinema, and along with other filmmakers like Zhang Yimou, who directed Raise the Red Lantern, and later on Crouching Tiger, I believe. Or was that Ang Lee? Okay, I could be wrong. And you know, a few other films that are significant in the new Chinese cinema, and I think this is probably my absolute favourite Chinese film.
I would have to agree in the sense that it's an epic, and normally when we talk about maybe Chinese cinema, a popular title that might come to mind is In the Mood for Love.
Yep.
What do you think in terms of which film did you see first between the two?
This or In the Mood for Love?
Yeah.
I think I seen In the Mood for Love maybe 4 years ago. I didn't appreciate it as much. Rewatched it actually around the same time as this, really. I think it was last summer I watched it, so actually kind of afterwards I rewatched In the Mood for Love, because the first time I saw Farewell My Concubine would have been maybe February last year.
Great stuff, and I guess the element that you can compare them to is the slow moving pace, you know, throughout the films.
Yeah.
And they're similar in that regard, and that's what Farewell My Concubine sort of has going for it. I think it's a bit of a, you know, there's some change there where we're really traveling for, you know, it's half a decade of Chinese history, but it's such a, you know, as set as a film stylistically and both in motion, it's quite slow moving.
Definitely,
you know,
it definitely
what
is.
do you think of that sort of unique element to it?
It's I think it must be something in Chinese cinema, because you'll get that from many Chinese films that I've seen, like Chungking Express, In the Mood for Love, and then Raise the Red Lantern by Zhang Yimou, which came out not a few years before this, I think, and it also stars Gong Li, but it's also very slow, and they're ones that they brood on you afterwards, and that slow meditative like pace really helps the film. And like I'd really like to know what your first thoughts are on it. You know, from rewatching it, I learned a lot more, which I'll definitely discuss more later on. But I'd like to see what you thought of it, since it's just fresh in your head.
Sure. Well, that's a good word you used there, was brooding, and that's sort of what the first experience has been. It's a sense where, you know, you sit down and you spend 3 hours, the best of 3 hours, watching this film, and you're really sort of teleported into this new location. You're into such a fast traveling period in Chinese history. Like we said, it's half a decade, and there's so much sort of, you know, subtle elements that really explored in that history. It's not just a a historical standpoint, but
Mhm.
you're also seeing, you know, inner
Personal.
struggles exactly
It's a
between
very,
the between the characters, and I believe that that all sort of becomes very deep rooted at the beginning, and that's when the opera training takes place.
yeah.
What do you think so much about that? You know, that sort of real harsh, traditional, and almost militaristic approach to training these theatre actors.
I mean, I totally agree. It's very interesting to. It's very. This hasn't been put on the screen, I don't believe. You know, this kind of story of children being forced to perform, and it's a very interesting story because it makes me. You know, we mentioned last night something like Freaks by Todd Browning in the 30s, a film that came out in the 30s, all about exploitation, and you know, it's not like it's just strictly a Chinese thing either. But what is strictly Chinese is what they are doing because it's all about Chinese theater, which we know is it is almost militaristic. It's all about. It's not about nuance like most of our theater is. It's not about making every night a different performance. It's about getting the lines precise. It's about making the correct movements, and it's all much more slow paced slow paced and rhythmic at the same time as you've seen in some of the very well choreographed moments it has, and it's a lot more elaborate. You know, it's very visual, very very colorful and stuff, and you know, and I think the film does an excellent job by showing this with the characters because of how important it is to one of the characters, and it does have a balance between history and this personal life.
Absolutely, you know, I couldn't agree more in the sense that we're getting this, you know, as a first sort of impression to the film, but also to the idea of Chinese theatre, and especially at this time, I feel that it was it's so well built around the sense of traditionalism and ideally challenging these two main protagonists to form an unlikely friendship. I mean, there's some values that hold true to today that are discussed in the film, such as, you know, being the sort of the offspring of a prostitute, you know, holds such a deep enriching element that can't be acceptable. But there's also this shade of art that comes in that really conflicts with that, and art is so prominent in the film. You know, it's almost to a point where it's not art, it's more routine, and that's what this theatre is essentially practicing through this growth. And not to jump too far ahead, but we see the same theatre, you know, that we see the master of the theatre constantly training the next generation after generation after generation, and the film captures that, you know, exquisitely well, and that's the sense of capturing this repetition for generation.
Definitely.
And this amongst training.
Definitely want to elaborate on that later on, so we don't spoil anything for you guys. Yeah, there's so much to say whenever you start to bring up things like that. But yeah, it's a massive story, and the character relationship is just incredible. As you said, it's a very unlikely friendship the way it starts off, and you know, it's this deep history defines their relationship throughout the whole film just because of that experience they went through as children. You know, it was like they suffered together in a sense.
Absolutely, they did, and they almost look out for each other. There's a scene where, you know, the I believe it is. Yes, it is Shang's character, who's played by Leslie Shang. He is essentially placed outside as a punishment, and it's in the cold season. You know,
Very early scene.
That's it. Yeah, very very beginning scene. And with that being said, he's placed out, and through that idea of torture to get his lines right and to get back into the routine of the theatre and what they expect. He's then greeted then by Duan, who essentially goes and gives him a blanket, and that, I guess, that was sort of the birthplace of their friendship.
Yeah, it's a very poignant moment, and that's the start of it. And before we'll talk a little bit about the cinematography and then wrap up our kind of first thoughts, because really right now I'm just itching to really dive into what needs to be said about this film, certain themes and everything, and the way the characters are explored. But it's very interesting the way it records history, and one thing that we have to mention when I'm talking about the traditional Chinese theatre, and it's the same for Japanese theatre until maybe the 60s or 50s, 60s or 70s, somewhere around that time. But female characters were always portrayed by males because females were simply not allowed to act. Now, that sounds outrageous in today's age.
Certainly.
And I couldn't even imagine. I mean, women in Japan have plenty of rights now, and it's still quite an issue in Japan, equal rights. I mean, they only got to vote, I believe, in the 30s or the 40s.
And that, I guess,
In
is,
just
is
Japan.
really
In Japan.
that's something that's almost a way to document that, a way to know and refer back to that time, because even if we, this is only made in the 90s, but to explore the idea of changing ideologies and things, that's what the film does extremely well.
Totally.
Also, with that growth in time over that spanning that 50 years.
Definitely.
So that's such a real interesting moment when we see ideas change, and we see almost a dominance more in female roles as it progresses. As you can tell, it goes from sort of a very masculine, militaristic to more female dominance, and starts to challenge some things that have been set out. So we can also dive into that, and that will be also an interesting exploration.
Yeah, and I guess we can kind of wrap it up by just mentioning this release itself. This just came out, and I think what sparked really doing this review is because I think this is the first time it's come out on Blu-ray, not just in the UK but everywhere, and it's a fantastic release.
That's recommend picking it up if you haven't already. It's a great piece to your collection, and it also includes a making of.
Yep.
That it's around 24 minutes. That also might be worth checking out there.
Yeah, and like he can't compare it, but I originally downloaded this film, and comparing it to that, the quality it's gorgeous. There's some shots that I genuinely just thought to myself, this looks very contemporary. This looks like it was filmed maybe 6-7 years ago, and that's because of just how well shot the film is, and we'll talk about that later. So just to kind of nip it in the bud for the general, what could you say in a sentence or two about this film?
I would say
what would your synopsis be on the back of that BFI release?
My synopsis of the back of this BFI release, I would say
your encouraging comment.
It is a masterful, thrilling, absolutely wonderful experience that is just, heartbreakingly beautiful.
So now that the general is out of the way, I guess we'll go into an in-depth discussion. And I think we'd like to see the film as a historical and personal epic.
I would agree, in the sense that if we delve into the history, we'll be able to find out a lot more about what brings these characters together, and that maybe is the theatre piece itself for Oh My Concubine. And it's such a deep-rooted story in regards to Chinese drama, and particularly old theatre, and that, in a sense, is made clear by the Ming Dynasty dramatist Xin Kai, who's mentioned this work in his previous literary drama works. And then we've also got some poetic influences by Feng Ming Long, who also had created poems and literary works about this story before it was picked up to a novel and further into a film by Lillian Lee. So if we compare those in the sense that yes, we've got a deep-rooted story, however we can actually explore the theatre piece itself and what it means, because it does have elements of poetry, and it does have very literary elements that would be almost the equivalent to a Chinese sort of Shakespeare in that sense, in a complete end of the spectrum. And as the theatre piece itself, really draws together the two main protagonists, it becomes timeless, because when they're performing it, when they get on to perform it, from the 30s to the 70s, they're dressed in this classic attire, this classic Chinese attire that's very symbolic, and their faces are painted, and they're almost indistinguishable to age. And this is where the idea of beauty and this compassion can come in, because when they're on the stage, they're framed, they're timeless, just like the theatre piece itself, forever to repeat itself. They're timeless.
That's a really, really good point. That's a very good point. I think you definitely see the age grow in the person who plays the king more, and Duan's character. But in terms of Xian, we know he's a very obsessed character. He's very obsessed with the theatre, and he seems to not age at all. And especially in the role that he's playing, it's quite impressive. It's quite shocking whenever you see him in the 70s and he looks exactly how he did in the 30s. No age difference at all. It's pretty incredible.
I completely agree. With him being the sort of character that even throughout history, I think he was ideally the most phased by all this, by the changes. He was the most fragile, but his essential, his beauty and his youthful appearance had it not been revoked. And,
yeah.
and we sort of wonder why, as he battles all this trial and tribulation through, being really tortured and I guess, perfected in a theater sense. He from such a young person, and then being the offspring of a prostitute concubine, he's a real product of this darkness.
Yeah.
But
and we'll definitely get into that when we talk about the characters, but we want to focus mainly on like how this film is like a historical personal epic in the sense that it covers so much ground, as we keep mentioning. And when thinking about the way that it captures history, for me, I think it's a little bit flawed in the sense that it brushes over some moments quite quickly. There's one scene when there's I believe it's a protest going on, it's whenever the war ends, World War II. It's whenever World War II ends, the war with Japan ends, and it's just like a 30-second clip. 1945, they're all cheering, marching down the street. It's raining, and it's probably not even 30 seconds long. I think it's like 10 seconds long, and I felt like that could have been elaborated on, something like that.
Definitely, it was. I guess you could consider it, even for it to be mentioned, it's ideally a crucial time in the transition period. But in the sense that it is a flaw for the film, I guess it's what adds to its movement and its overall motion, because you have such a time where there's so much going on in the backdrop. You can almost lose focus on the two main protagonists, but the film does a good job in directing the spotlight to them, and I feel that how it does that and how it performs it focuses on the stage, it focuses on the theatre element and the actual performance.
It's kind of like from the perspective of everyone that works in the theatre, because
excellent, yes.
We're not so much out in the streets seeing all this change, it's still very much the backdrop. It's a bit like how Cabaret shows the rise of the Nazi party, but it's from the perspective of a performing club. So, I can't believe I just made that comparison, and it actually kind of works.
True. Yes, it certainly does.
It's actually it kind of serves a bit of relevance.
No,
but it's always from their perspective. Shane's priority is what's this doing to theatre. He doesn't care about, he's all about the art. He doesn't care about the politics and the war and what's going on. He cares about performing
and friendship,
that much,
and friendship as well. He really cares about, and that can be stripped away from very easily, as he comes to find out, doesn't he? When his partner, his beloved friend, who there was a scene where they mention to each other they've come so far, so far with each other, that he is opening his heart and he's seeking for an eternal life with this person. He wants the entirety of his existence to be spent, and that to him, I guess, would be the only thing more important than the theatre, is friendship that he's gained through the theatre.
Yeah, definitely. And the film does cover so much ground. This film could be 5 hours long if it wanted to be, because it covers so much, and it does seem like it's skimming by a lot of things. Some parts are longer than others. The whole childhood sequence, I think, must be about 40 minutes. But before we even see them as professionals, it's a good 45 minutes long, and it needs that kind of setup. And I think, I do feel it jumps around quite a bit and a little bit too much. I feel like it could have elaborated on the relationship just a little more, especially with the Gong Wei character. It felt like that dynamic. It's almost like a triangle, a love triangle, because
you think between the two characters in the theatre, would you say, is the love triangle, or what would
be
the third component?
I mean, that's something I'll talk about. I'll talk about sexuality and love, and because the relationship between those two isn't exactly what I would call homosexual, but we'll get into that later. I'll open that can of worms later, gentlemen. But lost my point. Go ahead.
Sure. Well, as you do. So to even discuss the narrative structure and the amount of time covered, yes, it has its flaws. I would agree with that, but I would also sort of challenge you in the sense that I would say that not every area does indeed need to be covered, because I think we can both agree that, between the first, 45 minutes to the last half an hour, those are the two main cinematic elements that you want to, you can indulge in. With the middle period, although it is crucial, it is more slow moving, it is more, it bases, like we said earlier on, In the Mood for Love, it does bring to mind more of a production like that, in a sense. It's slow paced, and although it's gripping and it's important, it's crucial, it doesn't build up to the introduction and climax as much for me. So I feel like I was more in tune to getting towards those moments again after being sort of, off from the intro. I was looking more forward to getting to the climax, because we sort of get to know all we need to know after a certain point, and then we're left hanging for a while.
Yeah, this is true, except for the fact that history is changing quite a bit after, after Dewan gets married to the Gong Li character. We understand this dynamic, but it does start to venture a little further, and we'll talk about the repetitions in a second too. Whenever he comes back to his old master, that scene it's unbelievable. But overall, I guess to kind of wrap up then on discussing the narrative structure of the film, it's an epic. It really is.
It is indeed an epic, and it's just it's a real historic blueprint, I guess you could say.
And I think we're really going to delve into the characters, what they represent, what their relationship is, and what they're symbolic for, because there's a lot more than just this being about theatre. There's something there that you can't quite identify straight away when you watch it. It just hits you somewhere.
Yes, and it's so subtle, isn't it? That feeling of warmth, but also this instability that's almost in the air, because even as this backdrop is waging on, if we really look at these characters, we're seeing some cracks. We're seeing that there's prostitution, through that being an underlying theme that is somewhat addressed and somewhat covered. And when Gong Li then belongs to the House of Blossom, and her character, her dynamic comes in and makes appearances, it almost draws back to the mother.
Yeah.
The mother, and this sense of repetition that we mentioned as being a real reoccurring theme.
Yeah, and I didn't really think about it the first time I watched it until it was when you mentioned it to me. There is that, and there's a lot of repetitions, not just in the theatre performance, but a lot in their personal history, and history's repeating itself constantly. There's so much to say about that, and I know you have a good point, but since you mentioned the prostitution part, and it is a lot about his mother being a prostitute, that's probably why instantly, it's not just that, it's not only that she is going to steal Dewan away from him, and he's almost jealous in a sense, but it's also because she's a prostitute, and that really adds to it, and that's probably one of the reasons he resents her so much.
Absolutely, it reoccurs from the sense that his mother, that he's essentially an orphan. Both these protagonists are essentially orphans.
And he was old enough to remember, I reckon he was at least 6.
He was indeed, yes, he was around that age, and with that, he can hold this resentment that builds up, because you also have the mother dynamic where he's given this new friend, he's almost becomes a brother. He is, they refer to each other as theatre brothers.
Yep.
And so the whole dynamic is he's given into this new family. He's almost adopted by the theatre, most importantly by a brother, and it's almost stripped away again by the same force that he sees anyway, as backed up by the Chinese history of this concubine, this prostitute, and this resentment that comes with it. And that's a real underlying theme. It's such a provocative element that he's in, because he's been given a new family, but it's been taken away from him, by the same force, and you really do sympathize with him, and you really do feel for him as he goes through this emotional battle with himself and his history and all this coming together.
Definitely, yeah.
And resorts to other methods that we can dig into later, such as his opium addiction and the experience he has with the paedophile. That's also gripping, and there's so much happens to this character that's just overwhelmingly sad and tragic.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, because we get to stand back and we see all this. It's there's no we're the spectator, and we just kind of witness all this history, and in that way it's retrospective, the way we see their whole lives, and that's what's so powerful about cinema. You can do that. You can manipulate time in such a way that you can see an entire person's life. And two repetitions, two elements that have this that fit into this circle. I know that you have one to bring up about the theater. The first moment that we have is the mother cutting of the hand. The mother cuts the hand, and that is then the blood is then used to sign the contract, and then the mother leaves, and he is now part of the theater group. That little moment, I never noticed this the first time I watched it either, so as you can see, when you rewatch things, they become much more rich. Simple as that. But there's a moment much later on when Shen cuts his hand, still as a child, and it was from being whipped. His hand is bleeding, and he looks at his hand, and what struck me this time was when he's looking at his hand, it's such a powerful moment because he just might be thinking about his mother. This is maybe 3 years later, and that's such a powerful moment. It really is the bloody hand that is, it's almost like a stain, a reminder
very
of
symbolic.
how he even got here.
Absolutely, and that seals his fate.
Yeah.
The blood shed,
This is his fate.
blood shed, and that's a great point. And while he's being whipped for punishment by Master Guan, that's also there's also another point I made, not to be too nitpicky about it, but I also seen it as and interpreted as an idea of ownership. His mother had cleared the ownership and dismissed him by forcing in, that blood to sign a contract, sure, but then when his new master, the new ideally the new owner of him at that point, because of the conditions they were in, when he draws blood from his hand as punishment, it's almost like a real confirmation of turnover into absolution with his fate and becoming a part of that theatre group and to really bleed with his brothers who are all heavily and very harshly trained in them conditions.
Yeah, and then just to finalize my point, the mother, that is such a brooding that kind of does define this character, which I'll get into once I make this point. Hopefully I don't forget. But there's that other repetition when it's in a scene. I think it's in the mid-30s. I think it's during it's almost at the end of the war. I think it's a scene whenever he performs for the Japanese, but he finds a baby. They're walking by and a baby has been abandoned, and they find this child and they begin to raise it as their own. Actually, it's quite early on.
It is.
Isn't it? Because they're all children. That's
point,
right.
yes.
Excuse me for that. Yeah, they're still kids because there's this scene where they're all around this baby, and that obviously is a no-brainer. He sees an abandoned child, and all you could possibly think of is how that's kind of like that. He was also left, almost helpless, and yep, I forgot my point. I knew this would happen.
But you're really doing a good job in digging on the sense that history's repeating itself. Throughout the entirety of the film, it is, and this repetition is so
about the mother.
Effectively used. Do you want to go ahead and?
Yeah, just before I forget it, it's about how the mother really defines why he gets on the way he does. It defines his characteristic, his psyche,
Sure.
because the reason he latches on so much to his brother, it's all he has. It's all he really has, and this has really affected him because his life will always be empty without his mother. He'll never see his mother again. It's very sad, and you break it down to that, and that's really why he, when he does have emotional problems,
Sure.
He's definitely a flawed character in that sense because, it's
obsessive.
He's so obsessive. You almost feel sorry for him.
Yeah.
And it's quite selfish. Very selfish.
Possessive.
I want you possessive as well. You're meant to be with me.
Yeah.
And
the rest of my life.
Be there the rest of my life. Very possessive over them, and it's all because of the fact that he was abandoned as a child, and that's obviously something that's it's persisted. It stays with you, and that's what traumatic events like that can do in your life. And
absolutely,
I think the film does an excellent job at really showing that.
It does very psychological.
Very psychological.
And that longing that he has just for family, just for companionship, is really, it's startling at times because he latches on to anything he gets his hands on. He'll latch on to the theatre and perfecting his craft there. He'll latch on to, his theatre brothers. He'll latch on to the sense of, down the line he latches on to opium addiction, and that's covered, and although that'll follow. But it's like maybe the reason he wants to be so perfect is maybe he thinks he was abandoned. Is it because the psychology of children? It's like I did something, like when their parents split up. That was it because I did something wrong, and if anyone's ever been through a divorce out there, I approach this with the absolute sympathy and sensitivity. They go into this guilt complex, and maybe he was thinking the reason he was abandoned is because he wasn't perfect, and it's almost as if this is like not so much a redemption but something to make up for it. That's one of the
the hidden motivations that he's not even aware of himself.
Absolutely, that's one of his underlying drives, isn't it? To perfect his craft,
Yeah.
to perfect, and that's really that's a great point, because that's exactly what I also believe he experiences throughout it, and then if we can even touch on, you know, what his legacy is, what they're doing, you know, with their lives, then is before it's all set in stone, and before they begin performing these pieces, you know, these theatre pieces of For My Concubine as a set, they there's other underlying themes as well that is mentioned, and that's the idea of almost fame, and you know, this idea of recognition.
Yeah, and I think we should mention that one moment when it's the other kid.
That's exactly what I was about
Exactly.
to
I
mention,
mean,
yeah.
like that's I completely forgot about that for a second. But when they're
That is a great
children,
point.
Shen runs away with this other kid,
Mhm.
and they go see a performance of, I think it's the same play,
It's the
isn't
exact
it? It's
same
the exact
play.
same play, and they're watching it in awe, and the kid cries saying, "What does it take to become a star? How many beatings does it take?" That scene is so powerful. It's shocking, because this kid has been driven to that point that his existence is about being slapped on the
Essentially,
wrist.
Absolutely, and they don't see that as necessarily wrong, because they're seeing their role models on this stage,
And they think that's what it
they
takes.
believe that's what they've been through as well, and we don't have any notion of what they've experienced. Perhaps they're from the same theatre group, perhaps not, but to even see children go through that psychological manipulation, it's a
Trauma.
it's a real traumatizing experience for them, but also for us to look at and evaluate, because continuing down the line, there's more things that happen, because they're put in a place of vulnerableness, and we mentioned the idea of the old sort of degenerate man who takes advantage of his power and brings in these children to.
And I'd like you to elaborate on that too, about the repetition of how much later on in the film, Duan and Shen revisit this old man, and when you first see him, you know, he looks completely vulnerable, but and then the next thing you see, he still has his power, his influence, his control, psychologically, not physically.
Yes, and we touched upon that earlier on with the generation impact that he is having, Master Guan, in his ability to constantly train and to inhibit these actors to possess the same thing, and nothing has changed as they revisit, as you know, because he's still punishing his students very harshly, and he's still. What about the actual scene itself, where the dynamic comes that he comes back to punish them, in the sense that you can never escape the theatre. This is what you're trained for. This is why you exist.
And that's where he dies.
Rattles into them.
And we also forgot to mention in the child scene, when we were talking about the kid who cried with tears, seeing the, you know exactly what I'm about to bring up. He returns back and they're punished, and a really devastating moment when he hangs himself. Obviously, he thought that there was no point existing, because he could never be as famous as this, or just the absolute. I mean, just to be in that position at all.
It's such a such a traumatizing scene, because
such a theatrically done moment, with the big
and the stage fall. Yes.
Yeah, it's crazy, that scene.
And before we did a conversation about the human condition, and there's a scene in it where. And the reason why I want to draw, a slight comparison between these two is just because of the idea of traditionalness, and I know we mentioned it in that conversation. The idea of traditionalness in the sense of this militaristic training, and this just real riddling, fear-driven and fear-mongering possessiveness that the military had in the human condition relates to the almost like the theatre, in For My Concubine, and there's a scene in it where someone has also hung themselves in a human condition, and I sort of relate back to that, and because it was a feeling of they don't, there's worthlessness and fear of punishment, and those are so you can really draw a parallel there, because both of those characters are in the same sort of circumstance where they fear the punishment, and they've been riddled with fear to the sense where they know that if they don't fulfill a certain quota, which they've already missed because of
I'm not sure I could agree that it's the exact same kind of scenario, but from a child's perspective, this is like a war.
Absolutely.
This is as devastating as a war.
Well, the reason why I mention it is that I seen the theatre more militaristically than the actual Japanese army and the Chinese army. I'm not sure about you, but I seen more cruelty in that in the portrayal, even in the first 45 minutes in that portrayal. I seen more. I felt that's where the bite really was, of the harshness. Would you say, on the other hand, that, when we get to experience the Japanese army coming in and the Chinese army, would you say that they're more? I know that there's the idea of this animalistic. There's dogs barking. There's canines. What do you resonates more with this antagonistic approach coming in? What would be the more?
We do get to see the Japanese side, but I think it's quite objective. It's not saying one's better than the other, but I think it's more critical of China than showing Japan. Like, Japan's barely mentioned, and it seems like the way the Chinese are treating their own is the worst. But that's even mentioned. They're out here fighting amongst themselves. They should be fighting against the Japanese. That's in one moment, and
it seems more obnoxious, with a flashlight scene where they're disrupting the peace itself, and they say that even the Japanese soldiers show them respect.
Didn't do this, show some respect. Just let that car fuck off a second. And I think we've said pretty much, almost everything there is to say about the characters, except for sexuality and the actual love relationship. So, before I get into my analysis now, which I want to elaborate on, I'd like to hear what you have to say first.
Sure. Well, thanks for giving me the spotlight there, and you're right to dig up this, because this is it could be I guess an element where you could miss out on, but it's such a crucial but subtle, little nuance that the film has to offer. Sexuality is a real underlying theme, and I feel that it's in the divide of the protagonists. There's a crucial scene where Shang, consistently gets, a lyric wrong for a piece they've been practicing, and he says, "I am by nature a girl, not a boy," and it's laughed at, and it's really berated on because of the idea of challenging masculinity. But if we really analyse him as a character, out of the two, out of him and Duan, he's the more feminine. He even in the play, he performs as a female, in the sense that even with a high pitched voice and the dress, that's such, that to me strikes this feminine character, and the way he will appear in certain shots where he's sort of sleekly looking around the corner. It's a dynamic for Duan, because there's almost, I know you mentioned a love triangle earlier on. I feel that exists also in Duan's character, because he has an idea where he is the most masculine. He's the most I guess macho character, the strongest. He's the
king.
Absolutely, in the sense that he's playing it also, but he's I guess he's also challenged, his own idea of being a man, because he, like you say, king, but he also says he's a fake king. He doesn't live up to his role. He doesn't live up to his traditionalism.
There's something about the film that there's sexuality and lack thereof. I don't see Shang as like sexually active, and the I don't know if he is a homosexual really, except for that one scene. I mean, there's nothing that points straight out that he is, other than the fact that he plays a female character, and the way he speaks of his mate. But I think it's like brotherly love. It's an extreme brotherly love that is almost homosexual, but it's not. It's because he's not obsessed sexually or anything. It's not. You never see that. It's more about I need you to be with me, because he's the anchor, in a sense.
Absolutely. I would necessarily disagree to that to an extent, because I feel that there is those subtle moments of, and not to essentially say that it's outright obvious, but at least for my interpretation, especially in the scene with the theater extraordinaire, in these moments of I guess conscience, we're seeing a conscious Shang, and in those moments he appears to me, at least, to have that under that overwhelming desire. I mean, there is momented perhaps a kiss, where it cuts. We need to sort of make our minds up. Did it happen? Between him when he's drunk with the theater, the rich theater respected gentleman reviewer. I'm not sure what his title is, but there's that, and then the scene towards when they're just essentially they're only at the start of their fame, And just the chemistry they have almost becomes more than brotherly, and that's through the touching and the, there's such a exclusive scene where his hands are running down.
Yeah.
Is it here?
Yeah.
And then they stop, but they stop not because it's wrong. They stop because someone's about to enter in. So that makes me think,
Right. Yeah. That
really?
seems almost like they stopped what they were doing because it was like, oh, we're gonna get caught almost,
Yes.
and this is
Mhm.
true, but at the same time, he literally says in the same scene that he's gonna go. He's going out to see a prostitute, and that's the person he ends up getting engaged with and marrying. So, I don't. It's a difficult one to really pinpoint,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Certainly.
The sexuality of this film, because it's so. It's very ambiguous, very ambiguous.
And that exists within the theatre context as well. I mean, that's always been, at least especially in the sort of West as well. There's always been at least some themes that can reoccur in production works where sexuality is sort of up in arms, and it rings true here too. And just to further discuss that point, I do believe that Shank's character is more in tune with that side. However, Duan perhaps he's not necessarily masking it. Perhaps he doesn't feel that way, but I feel like it's not a healthy relationship that they have. That one is looking for something where the other can't have it. It's sort of it's a limiting friendship that certainly doesn't go 50-50 with each other.
Yeah, and it's definitely a love-hate thing because throughout all the years of things, there's obviously gaps where they're actually together and they're not speaking to each other, but in the end, it's like they can't exist without one another.
Sure.
Regardless of what's going on. And I think that's pretty much, that's a lot that we have covered just about these characters, and as you can see, there's just so much to talk about, when you really break it down. And I guess next to really talk about is cinematography, some shots that stick out for you, things like that. What do you think of the way the film's shot?
I think it's beautifully shot. Very so it's sort of a unique style going for it. Not that I to be completely honest, my focus wasn't primarily on the cinematography, but I find that the cinematography more or less slipped in.
It stands usually cinematography will always stand in as like an anchor, but the way the camera moves or how we can't see certain things in the framing, it's all very important how the meaning is created, because it makes you as an audience member, like the camera is telling you what to be looking at that moment. What's important. Is it what's in the background or is it what's in the foreground?
Excellent. Yes, and that's
like
very
that.
true. And I was wanting to ask you, considering a lot of the standpoint, because you mentioned this earlier on, it's almost like we're almost the theatre audience, but only of the film. The production itself is the entirety of their lives. It almost rings out like a theatre piece. Do you feel like the cinematography sort of attached us to that backtracked us and gave us this view of restraint, to the story as well?
I definitely do. There's I don't know why, but one moment this struck me to thinking, how camera angles can really cleverly be used to show perspective. If it's a character's perspective, it could be over the shoulder. Sure. It can be a two shot between their eye lines matching up, something like that. But if you just distance the camera in a big long shot, you don't move, it's a long take, you're just there watching the characters move around the frame, and it is just like you're witnessing what's going on. And it's that scene when Gong Li has to clean up the mess that Doan has just made because he's been smashing things. You remember that moment? And when he's really angry, and there's just something about that where we are just the spectator here. We're just sitting there watching objectively. It's not from one of the characters' points of view or anything. We are just taking on a journey with these characters.
I couldn't agree more. That's an excellent point, and I just get the impression as well that we really are being strung along in a theatre piece that is their lives, that goes beyond, for my concubine. It's really a sort of tragedy that unfolds throughout their time, because yes, we mentioned Gong Li, and before that scene in particular, with the loss of Duan's child, I feel like that moment in particular, and to draw a little bit back to earlier on, he sort of had, his face was covered in blood and he had a mask on, he had the painted mask at least, and that, we mentioned the symbolism of blood, and almost
the mask has been cracked in a sense.
Absolutely, it's been unfolded, and the sense of blood as well being used symbolically, because with Shank's character earlier on, that his blood sealed his fate, However, blood is almost used in a different way, approaching Dwan, where it's in his face. It's something that will never be. It's another sense of loss
Mm-hmm.
with his child. However, this sense of it's very you can get very deep into this. It's a very melancholic sort of turn of events that happen there.
Yeah. Oh, shit, I kicked that. And another thing in the cinematography that stuck out, I'd like to see if you have anything to elaborate on, but how characters were often covered by some sort of veil, some sort of translucent material. Like, is there any moments that you can think of?
There is indeed, and
There's so many.
Isn't there? Just there was that point where when I guess Shang is experiencing the opium addiction, he's under a veil. We're laid back, and we mentioned earlier on with the long hair.
And we look through the fish tank as well.
Yes, yeah. There's many layers. There's many filters put ahead of us. To interpret that, and do you believe then that would sort of play with our interpretation of the story and at least our standpoint of how we're brought in, because we're not given this exclusive view per se. We're almost
I think the way they use those kind of shots is it's making us look at these characters and that like nothing is certain. Literally the translucent material and it makes things, it shrouds things. It shrouds, like we never really get a sense of who these people are anymore. It looks at how you can't take things at face value in life. You really don't know how people are. It's very, very hard to get this point out, but it's literally showing not a mask, but how things are shrouded, how things have become much more unclear, and in shots like that, you're kind of seeing that, and you see that in that scene, and then obviously when we get to the finale, you have the flames covering lots of the action. Like, what do you think of that whole climax? Because I think it's the last half an hour of the film that has made me remember it so well.
I guess that was the most heart-wrenching moments, especially towards the end, because especially with us, we sat down and I guess the characters, I could see, were really growing on us, over that time period, and to see this almost, self-destruction towards the end, where I feel like everything and everyone was against each other. You had the downfall of the theatre, you had the complete and utter, lack of transparency with the characters. They go against each other.
Right, and the flames kind of represent this, absolute chaos it is.
Exactly,
it's like,
yes.
because every character kind of leaves that scene empty or shattered in some way. Everyone walks away alone in a sense, and it kind of captures the chaos of the whole scenario of why they're even there in the first place.
I couldn't agree more.
With the whole culture revolution. And
do you think the idea, because it's a great point to mention, the flames and the use of cinematography with them, to symbolize that. However, we're kind of used, especially the Shang's character creating fires, from the, one of the beginning scenes, he did it inside. What do you think about the use of fire and how it went from
that
maybe,
just struck an idea with me now about how this is getting into making up anything about a movie sort of area, but with that, because there is a lot of fire in it. When you do think about it, he burns his clothes in one scene at the start. He burned an item of clothing.
Yes.
I think that was the clothing he came with, and that's looking at the self-destructive path of the characters. We're looking at, just the chaos that has ensued since the beginning of the film, that's, I mean, aside from being a repetition, you can see it in that one scenario at least, for that, the way the flames are representing.
Then that's the climax, isn't it? It's such a build-up. I mean, like we say, with that first scene, he burns that item of clothes that he came with inside the room. He then burns his theatre clothes midway through the film, and then the self-destructive fires at the end. And with that build, from one extreme to the other, it gradually came up, and to me that also represented sort of the death of the theatre, because it was sort of convoluted in his his speech at the end.
They're throwing other things in the middle.
Yes.
And by him burning, it's like the burning of theatre, because
he's
almost like the entity of theatre. He's the heart of it in this moment, because of how famous he's become. He's one of he's like known as the significant figure of theatre in this film.
Absolutely, and before then, they were trying to replace him and things in the previous scene. Before that, it was almost as if they were they were pushing him on, and him being such a, Shane being such an obsessive character, I feel that he was reluctant. He was acting as, in that last monologue, he was acting as the last sort of, the last shriek the theatre had.
Yeah.
Yes, the last act was in him, was inside him, and it was his monologue, and he stands up against, the Chinese army, stands up amongst all the kneeling theatre performers as they are humiliated, and people are shouting, bring them down, and this, this whole idea of communism is also in the air, but he's the last sort of performance that came out of that theatre in a sense too, before they reconnect, but that was a real symbolic scene, I think, theatrically, for the theatre.
It's just like this emotional build up, and this is something that he's been trained to do as a child. You can imagine what that means. It's like your entire existence is empty now because they don't know anything else. They can't do anything else with their lives, and this is what especially for this character, since he is so obsessive. This is it.
Yeah.
His life has literally just went up in flames.
And to quote Duan, all I know what to do is how to sing. When he's breaking things and not able
yeah.
to sing, that's all
right,
I know.
right, and that's what that scene's about.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think we've pretty much said most things that could be said about this film. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I just want to conclude that it was such a an excellent experience, and to thank you again for having me on this discussion.
Well,
yourself.
It's hours. So
yeah. What about yourself? Is there anything you got from rewatching it the second time that you just have been taken away by, or
most of the things that I have said, I've only really realized about this film seeing it a second time, and I think I enjoyed it more. It was richer. Even discussing it now has made it a richer experience, and it's a very elaborate film. It's completely emotionally charged, even if there are some moments that I feel are quite weak. It's as a whole, when you think of its cohesive story, as a cohesive whole, it's just such a compelling story, and I think it doesn't matter where you're from. I think this breaks any language barriers. It's a foreign film, but I knew nothing. I mean, we both know nothing about Chinese theatre, but this film it gives you enough information.
Yeah.
It gives you enough information that it doesn't matter.
Well,
I think that's about it. Everybody, thank you for joining us, and I hope you stay tuned for our next discussion video. And if you stayed to watch a majority of this, thank you. I hope you enjoyed our ramblings, and we'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Until next time.
Yep, until next time, everybody. I'll see you then.
Nice thumbs up.
I
was synced, wasn't it?
I just did the one.
I was synced. That's a real socially awkward one.